glory belongs to you. All of the glory belongs to you. Well, good morning. I want our singers and our musicians to know that my daughter leaned over to me and said, "Is this true? Is this just happened? Why can't we go to a church with music like that?" I said, "We can. I just got to find one. You guys are good. It's a bit of a commute up here." Now, I took a little video of you guys up front. Is it okay if I put it on Facebook? You know, I'm a lawyer. I got to get permission. You guys okay with that? Because this is what I want to say to my friends who don't come to church anymore. If you're tuning into America's Got Talent or American Idol or whatever you're doing, you know, you do that. But I got to tell you, if you want to see America's talent, come back to church. Thank you. Now, I got to tell you, I got a particular soft spot for saxophone because my youngest daughter plays saxophone. And I got to tell you, you're impressive. I told Sky, my youngest daughter, I said, watch what she does and do that. It's harder than it looks, I know. But I tell you, I walked into this church, John, and I thought, oh, this is going to be good. I get to preach, you know? But I guess not. Oh, well. But what a beautiful building and a lovely place to spend time together. John mentioned that we haven't known each other long, but sometimes you meet somebody and you just click. You had that experience? And my wife will be my witness on this stuff. After we met and we were talking and I came back home, I said, man, I've met this really great guy. And we did an afternoon program, and John sort of was answering these questions, and he did them with such insight and balance and everything that goes into that. I said, wow, this is Charles, you've got a good eye for talent, man, and so I'm really glad that we're all part of the same team. It is great to be with Charles Usey. Charles. Is somebody who's encouraged me my entire career, and I really appreciate it. And we've been friends for years now, and friendship when you're fighting in the trenches is something that you greatly value. Sometimes the trenches are in the church, sometimes they're out, but wherever we are, we're together. And John mentioned earlier, Claude Morgan is with us. I know that you probably don't know these people, but I just should say something about Claude, because Claude is one of the inspirations to all of us who work in religious freedom. He did things that paved the way for what we hope to do. And if we can just come close to emulating him, it will be a wonderful thing. So thank you to each one of you. My daughter mentioned that I was born in Australia. And I know what you're thinking, because we live in a world, in a society, in an era where in America we say, okay, what have you ever done for us? America, we gave the world rhythm and blues. We gave them country and western. We gave them jazz. We gave the world rock and roll. We gave the world rap. We gave them hip hop. What's Australia ever given to us? Well, I can answer that question this morning with two words. Bee Gees. Oh, yeah. Australia gave you the Bee Gees. Night fever, jive talking, nobody gets too much heaven no more than a woman. I looked it up, friends. I want you to know this. The Bee Gees are the third most charted group in the Billboard 100 in the history of the Billboard 100. There's only two acts to pass them. There's the Beatles, okay, and there's the Supremes. The Beatles, the Supremes, and the Bee Gees. How big are the Bee Gees? Destiny's Child? Oh, they've covered the Bee Gees. That's right, don't forget it. That's Australia's contribution here. And my favorite song that the Bee Gees ever recorded was a song called Words. And it has this line, and it goes like this. It's only words, and words are all I have to take your heart away. You know this song? 27 years ago, I was a young guy. I was in a place called Auckland, New Zealand, and I was sitting across the table from the most gorgeous woman in the world. And I was not there casually. I had come with a mission. But I had a problem. I didn't have a house. I didn't have a condo. I didn't have an apartment. I didn't even have a lease on a house or an apartment or a condo. This morning we were talking about getting in debt. Oh, I had debt. Student debt. I did not have savings. At that stage in my life, I did not even own a car. And yet, I had an audacious mission. I was there to ask the most gorgeous woman in the world to marry me. I did not even have the money to pay for the meal, friends. All I had was a credit card. I shouldn't be telling you this after your thing about don't get in debt. Hey, sometimes debt's worth it. You'll hear. All I had was a credit card, and that was the only way I could afford the meal. But I looked over at this gorgeous woman, and after we'd talked and we'd laughed and everything seemed to be going okay, I said, I want to ask you a question. He says, oh, yeah, well. It was quite a casual response. You know, I had big things on my head. Will you marry me? She looked at me and she went like this. Well, I really like you. Like! I'd come all the way to New Zealand. The last thing I wanted was like. I really like you, but I said, stop. Hear me out. And at this point, I gave my most important speech of my life. Just a couple minutes. I told her about the wonderful life we could have together. I told her I would respect her and I would love her and I would worship the ground she walked on for the rest of her life. Oh, yeah. All that and a little bit more. And at the end, I said, before you give me an answer, I've done something today. I've gone out and I have something I'd like to show you. I reached into my pocket. I brought out a little blue velvet case, and I opened it up. And friends, in it may have been the least impressive engagement ring ever made. It has 3 little sapphires and the 4 smallest diamonds I think you can buy. It was all on my credit card. I got to be honest. And I said, can I just see if it fits on your finger? Come on. took it out and I put it on. And I said, Lisa, will you marry me? And she said yes. Words are all I had to take her heart away. You hold up. Are you wearing that ring? Are you wearing that ring? Okay, hold that up. People will see. Can you? That's it. You know, it was our 25th anniversary, and I said, I'm going to go out and I'm going to buy you a proper ring. A big sapphire, and you know what she told me? She didn't want another ring. Words are all I had to take her heart away. You heard our scripture reading this morning as we're going to look at words a little bit. Because words are a powerful thing. In the book of Proverbs, God gives us a message about our words. And it's a message that I don't think we're thinking enough about in the Seventh-day Adventist Church right now. And I think we need to get back to where we started and really think very deeply about our words and the impact that our words can have on our world. In Proverbs 31, 8-9, different versions put it different ways, but this is a more modern version, which is, I think, helpful because it expresses this in ways that get the meaning of it into our modern language. It says this: speak out for those who cannot speak, for the rights of all those who are destitute. Defend the rights of the poor and the needy. I got a question for you guys this morning. How much of your outreach is standing up for the rights of the destitute and the poor? You see, we've gotten into a habit in our church where we think about outreach only being preaching the gospel. Oh, wait a second, though. Wait a second. What is the gospel? Oh. Some people say if we speak out for the rights of the poor and the destitute, that's the, quote, social gospel. That's over there, and the real gospel is over here. Is that the way the Bible presents it? This is what Jesus said when he was just starting his mission. It's found in Luke chapter 4, verses 18. He's reading from Isaiah, and he says this: the Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he has anointed me to proclaim the good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight to the blind, to set the oppressed free. Are you telling me that when we talk up for the rights of the poor and the oppressed, we aren't preaching the gospel? Jesus didn't say that. Jesus said he came for that express purpose. Sometimes we think that when we speak up in our society for those who are oppressed on issues that are controversial, somehow we are entering into a dangerous paradigm, and it is safer to remain silent. Elie Wiesel, who's a Nobel Prize winner, talking back about the Holocaust, had this to say. Some people say neutrality is being neutral. That's the way to go. It's safe. This is what he says. We must take sides. Neutrality helps the oppressor, never the victim. Silence encourages the tormentor, never the tormented. You see, silence is not neutrality. Silence is complicity. Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said this, and this is one of the saddest statements I think you can find. In the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies. We expected our enemies to say bad stuff about us, right? That's what you expect. That's why they're your enemies. That's not what he's going to remember, he said. The movements, this is what he said. In the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. Okay, I'm quoting to you about the Holocaust. I'm quoting to you about the Civil Rights Movement. What's this got to do with Seventh-day Adventist Christians? Friends, have you studied our history? Do you know what this church started out like? Do you think that we were afraid of controversy when the Seventh-day Adventist Church started out? Do you think that we just had some idea of what's going to happen in the future or what happened in the past and had nothing to say about the world that we lived in? Friends, get into your church history. This church started out like a all-consuming fire. Yes, we had the ideas of prophecy. Yes, we had the character of God. Yes, we had a deep understanding of doctrine. And yes, we applied all of that understanding and all those teachings to the world that we lived in because we were living in a world that was broken and we had a voice that God had given to us and we used it. This is what Ellen White said. We are not doing the will of God if we sit in quietly doing nothing. We're not doing the will of God. If you sit on the sidelines, you see things that are going wrong and you say, what's that got to do with me? I'm only good for heaven. I've got nothing to say about what happens in this earth. When we strip our faith from its relevance to the society that we live in, we are not living out the gospel. We are living out a fraudulent gospel. Think about this. When Jesus came to this world, he did a lot of very interesting things. And, Jesus is our example, but kids, get your parents' permission before you do this. He went through the temple with a whip. Did you know that? I thought he was gentle Jesus, meek and mild. But do you know why he went through that temple with a whip? Ellen White comments on it. She says this. He saw the unfair transactions. He saw the distress of the poor, who thought that without the shedding of blood, there would be no forgiveness for their sins. Christ saw that something must be done. I wonder what Jesus would do if he came back in the subprime mortgage crisis. What would he do if he saw people being exploited by credit card companies? I'm just asking. We only have an example. We don't have every jot and tittle laid out. But I'm asking the question. What offended Christ was that poor people were being exploited. You know that Christ, it's interesting about Jesus going through the temple with a whip, because it's a little bit of a controversial passage because it appears in two different places in the Gospels and in different chronologies. And people have sort of argued, well, maybe some of the gospel writers got it wrong, or what happened. Ellen White actually comments on that. And she says, no, they got it right. He did it twice. Can you imagine that? I tell you, sometimes people look at Christianity and they think that Christianity is a safe, middle-class, polite religion. That's not who Jesus was. Jesus was a very, very, very unconventional person. And when you read his message, it doesn't cohere well with regular materialistic society. It's a very confrontational message, or as we say, confronting. Ellen White has a lot of things to say. It's kind of an interesting to read her writings because they seem so out of keeping with our average church experience. During her time, there was a law called the Fugitive Slave Law. And as we look back on it, it just sounds unbelievable that it existed, but John knows because he's a lawyer. When you have property, you can't receive stolen property. You understand that? That's a basic rule of thumb. You got a friend who, I don't know, I was going to say steals CDs, but nobody has CDs anymore. Well, let's go back to those days. Steals CDs and comes to you and say, hey, you want a free CD? If you take that CD and you know it's stolen, that's receiving stolen property, and that's a crime. Of course, back in Ellen White's day, they had human property. So they passed a law. They said if you help a slave escape in any way, you are culpable in the same way as if you received stolen property. So Ellen White had a few things to say about that. What do you think that she might say? Let's keep the peace. We just get along, go along people. This isn't good, but let's preach the gospel. Let's not get involved in this. Right? Is that what she said? Our forebears in this church were incredibly strong people who didn't mind to take a controversial position if it was the right thing. This is what she had to say. Our laws sustain an evil which is sapping their very foundations. Many deplore the wrongs that they know exist, but consider themselves free from all responsibility in the matter. This cannot be. Now she goes on about the fugitive slave laws. The fugitive slave law was calculated to crush out of men every noble, generous feeling of sympathy that should arise in the heart for the oppressed and the suffering. It was in direct opposition to the teachings of Christ. It's a pretty heavy statement. But then she goes on. The law of our land requiring us to deliver a slave to his master, we are not to obey, and we must abide the consequence of violating the law. How often does your pastor get up here or your conference president say, okay, we're going to disobey the law now because it's an immoral law? Well, most of us don't do that too often. But that's how we started. Recently, I was asked to research an issue. It's the issue of sanctuary churches. You know this issue of sanctuary churches? These are churches that have said, okay, we have people here who are undocumented. We're going to let them stay in our churches to assist them not to be deported. I was asked to research this issue not because it was an abstract idea that was out there, but because we had two Seventh-day Adventist members, one of them a church elder, not somewhere over there, out there somewhere, but in New Jersey, who were picked up and slated for deportation. Now, friends, I believe in the rule of law. I think that people shouldn't come illegally, all these things, so that's fine. But here's the circumstances here. These two guys came over 20 years ago. They came over from a country where they were suffering a persecution. If they would have known what to do, they could have got asylum in this country, legally. But they were poor. They didn't speak English. They were unconnected. They didn't know what to do. They didn't do it, but they didn't go back to their home country, and I don't blame them, do you? They were picked up. They built their lives. They've been here 20 years. They have children. They have jobs. They've been contributing to society. They have no criminal records. What good does it do to take people like that and rip them apart from their families and send them back to a country where they had to flee from? Because they weren't well connected and they didn't have a good lawyer. Is that right? Is that just? Is that fair? Is that appropriate? I looked at it and I said, I can't believe this is how our tax money is being used. Is this really what we want to do? So I started looking back and I said, well, what's the precedent in our church? And I started researching the life of a guy by the name of John Byington. You ever heard of John Byington? John Byington was the first General Conference president. Now, when I've seen pictures of John Byington, I'll be honest, he doesn't look very inspiring. Have you ever seen Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs? Do you know Grumpy? He looks a bit like Grumpy in the picture. He's kind of got a bald head, a big sort of funky beard that people had back then. He's sort of looking like this. And I thought, oh boy, look at our first president. Looks like a barrel of fun, that guy. But not everyone's photogenic, and back then people sort of posed in a particular way. But this is what I found out about him. John Byington is a hero. Not only was he an outspoken abolitionist, but John Byington's farm was a stop on the Underground Railroad. And I know what you're thinking, well, isn't that great? We all agree Underground Railroad's great, that's fine. It wasn't great when he was alive. Okay? You can get picked up and imprisoned for the reason that we just talked about with the fugitive slave law. You're helping to deprive people of their property under the law of the time. He put everything on the line for something that he believed in. And when I started looking at his life and I looked at our lives today, I thought, wow, it's a challenge. What are we doing? When are we going to find our voice? When are we going to speak up for the rights of all the destitute and defend the rights of the poor and the needy? Our sister got up here this morning and said that she had 2 bullet holes through her house. That's not normal. If you look at the murder rate in the United States today, it is roughly 4 to 5 times as high as it is in the United Kingdom, in Australia, or in Canada. The situation that we have here in the United States is not normal. And there is a correlation between the way that we treat our firearms laws and the number of our young people who die. There's no serious debate about that. Yes, there's political debate, because there's political debate about everything when there's money in the process. This week we had the 17 minutes to walk out. And I'm very proud that my oldest daughter was able to do that. It's a small thing. I know what you're saying. Well, that didn't change the world. The world changes when we use our voice. And the world remains the same when we remain silent. Friends, what we're living through is not normal. There are things we can do to change it. Oh, I pray that Seventh-day Adventist Church, we find our voice. I've talked about 2 issues that typically are supported by the political left. I hope you don't mind if I talk about an issue that's typically supported by the political right. You know me, John. You don't know me that well, but you know me a bit. I am no, slave to a political party. I'm a registered independent. I don't look at my religion through my politics. I try to look at my politics through my faith, which means it's kind of hard. I want to just touch very briefly, because I know it's a very sensitive issue, but it's an important issue. It's an issue that our founders spoke about a lot, and that is the value of human life even before a child is born. I know it's complicated, and I'm not going to pretend that it's not. And to anyone who makes things simple, I get it. It's a very complex issue. My own oldest daughter, the one who got up and introduced me, was born severely premature. I know what it's like to hold and to look into the eyes of a baby that typically would not be born yet. I've looked at this issue because I'm troubled by it. Since Roe v. Wade was decided, 60 million American babies have had their lives taken. 60 million. So I've tried to figure out, what does the Bible have to say about this? What does the early church leaders have to say about it? What was the environment around when Jesus was on earth? Josephus talks about it, and the Jews had a strong value of the life of a child. We know from Luke chapter 1:41, when Elizabeth heard Mary's greeting, we're told in Holy Scripture that John the Baptist, who was a baby, the baby leaped in her womb. I believe that we're made in God's image from the beginning to the end. I know it's complicated, and I'm not going to pretend it's not. And anyone who says it, and there's all sorts of very difficult things, and I don't have the answer of what to do in every case or anything even vaguely like that. I'm just saying, it would be great for our church to talk about the value of life. You know, in some countries, we have a gender imbalance because the cultures don't value women. And so when a woman is pregnant, they do an ultrasound and they find that it's a girl. Boys and girls, men and women, value everyone from beginning to end. Just touch on one final issue. It happens to be one that I'm working on with the Adventist Development and Relief Agency, ADRA. It's refugees. Last year, the United States dropped the number of refugees that we took in by 42%. I want you to think about that for a second. We are now at a period of Earth's history where we have more refugees than we have had at any time since World War II. Normally, when you have a crisis of this magnitude, the countries that can should open their hearts. We are rich. We are powerful. We are great. Well, I can tell you how you know if you're great or not. It's how you treat people who need help. That's greatness. At the end of the Vietnam War, there was a refugee crisis. Now, we didn't want that crisis as a nation. That wasn't our plan when we got involved in the Vietnam War. It was a tragedy that we had not foreseen. But because we're a good, great nation, we said we hadn't intended this to be the result of our foreign policy. It was the result, so we're going to open our doors a little bit wider to let people in. Friends, the current refugee crisis is not entirely unrelated to our foreign policy. That's the truth. The Iraq War and the knock-on that's happened in Syria, etc. A great and good nation says we did not intend this to be the results, but we'll open our arms a little bit wider to help. We can't solve the whole problem, but we can solve a little bit of the problem. If we just went back to accepting the number of refugees on average that we did during Ronald Reagan's presidency, we would double the number of refugees we're taking in. Canada has almost 500% the ratio of refugees to their general population that we have. You know, refugees is something that should be close to all of our hearts because Jesus was a refugee. Herod threatened to kill him, and his family fled to Egypt. That's a refugee. That's what we call a refugee today. In my own family, it's something that I care very deeply about for two reasons. My family were refugees when they left Europe to come to Australia. They were religious refugees. They were Protestants, and they were a part of the Radical Reformation. And it wasn't going very well for them. So they got on a boat and headed to Australia. And my first real job when I was a kid growing up in Asia was teaching English to refugees from Laos on the border all those years ago. Refugees, we can sometimes talk about them as numbers. They're not numbers, they're people. Just as real and just as many dreams and hopes and fears that you and I have. I hope that we're going to start doing a letter writing campaign on that issue, incidentally. That's what we're working on. I'll let John know about it, and we'll begin that. I want to end with just a story. It's a story that happened to me a little while ago. A few years ago, I was sitting in Washington, and I got a call from Switzerland. Now, I don't get a lot of calls from Switzerland. I said, hello, how can I help you? He said, the voice on the other end said, I need your help. We have an Iranian convert to Christianity who helps with Adventist World Radio, has now been picked up and has been put in prison in Turkey. I said, okay. now we want you, James, to get him out of prison. I said, what? I'm in Washington. I haven't never even been to Turkey. How am I going to get this? They said, look, you're all we got. If he is deported back to Iran, he will likely be killed. And we knew that. We had reports of this because of conversion from Islam to Christianity is very complicated there. So I started thinking about it, and I went to the State Department and asked them to help out. They said, sure, we'll help, but they don't really listen to us a whole lot. And I went over to some members of the Senate and asked for them to send letters, and they did. Very good. Didn't make any difference. And I was at the end of my wits. What do I do? So I was talking with a friend of mine, a Catholic friend, in the UK, in the United Kingdom. I said, Ben, I've got this problem. What would you advise? And he said, well, here's something for you to think about. Turkey wants to join the European Union. I said, yeah. But they're not being allowed in. One of the reasons they're not being allowed in is because their human rights record is poor. Why don't you get a European member of parliament? You know they have a European parliament. You know about this, right? Why don't you get a European member of parliament to write a letter to the Turkish interior minister on behalf of your Iranian Adventist in their prison? I said, that sounds great. I don't know any European members of parliament. And he said, don't worry, I do. So that's how I got in contact with an Irish member of the European Parliament who was a very strong Catholic. And I said to this member of Parliament, I explained the problem, and he went through it. He said, okay, sending the letter today. Off the letter went. Just a few words on a sheet of paper, sent from Dublin to Ankara, Turkey. Within a day, our brother, whose name was Emmett, was out of prison. I'll never forget, because the way I found out that he was out of prison was a call from his wife. And she was crying. He's out. He's free. It was one of the most beautiful calls I've ever had in my life. He said, my daughter's with me. I just can't wait to see her daddy. Friends, a few words. Our words. Your words, my words. Together our words can make a very big difference in our world. It's only words. The words are all we have to change our world today. Are you with me? My prayer for you and for our church more broadly is this. God has given us a voice. Let's use that voice to speak the words to set the captives free. Amen. Say, my God is big, so strong, so mighty, my God, that's for me, goes beyond my wildest dreams. My God is good, so good to me. My God is big, so strong, so mighty. My God, that's for me, goes beyond